Welcome to the AirCon Vault. Here you can find the recordings of the live streams from Evergle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Aftertouch Audio, Boom Library, S-Mod, Game Audio Learning, Game SoundCon, Kilohertz, Rev Rooms, Soundcut, Strata from Audio Kinetic, and Evergle, the online home for audio people. We hope you enjoy the video.
Hi everyone, I hope that video got you pumped, and I hope that the people who want to listen to this talk are starting to make their way in, or have already. My name is Filip Järnmark, and I'm a sound designer at Hazelight Studios in Stockholm, and welcome to my talk, Where Do We Go Now? Audio and Split Fiction. First off, I'm very happy to host this talk with you. It's my first presentation ever, so losing my talk virginity with you here at AirCon feels pretty exciting. And as I see, you already know the chat is live, and it's going to be open throughout this presentation, and you can post any questions you might have. But and I will make sure to have time after my presentation is done to go through your questions or comments, but I won't focus on them as I go. So with that taken care of, let's begin. This talk, Where Do We Go Now? As the title suggests, will be about navigation, and specifically how the Hazelight's audio team managed to navigate through many of the challenges that we faced during the production of Split Fiction, with attention especially drawn to the end of our production. So I will briefly talk about what Split Fiction is about, the premise of the game, and dive into the audio direction that we set for it and our thought process behind our audio direction. And I will also talk about a method that we in the audio team call first pass, only pass, and how we use this method in conjunction with our audio direction. And finally, I hope to tie this talk together by explaining how our audio direction and our first pass, only pass method were absolutely crucial tools for us being able to finalize the soundscape of Split Fiction. And along the way, I hope that you have gotten a deeper understanding of how we worked with audio on this game, and hopefully also gain some valuable takeaways. So speaking about navigation, I have a metaphor that I'd like you to keep in mind throughout this talk. And when I think about navigation in its most basic form, I think about my primary school's physical education's orienteering days out in the woods. And we were given a map and a compass. And hopefully you're all familiar with these two items in one way or another. And my metaphor that I want you to remember throughout this talk is this. So let's say that our map is the game and our audio scope. And we need to navigate to every source on the map in need of audio and populate them with sound. And then our compass is our audio direction. So let that represent the reliable means of determining our direction. And then our compass needle in this example is detached, and that's our first pass, only pass method. We know where we want to go, so let's align with that direction and move towards it. But before we continue, I just quickly want to introduce you to the audio team at Hazelight. And these are my colleagues and dear friends, inclusive of external contractors that we had on board to help us ship Split Fiction. And I just want to give a huge shout out to them all. They are all rock stars in my book, and they make my work at Hazelight a breeze, and everything that I show today is thanks to the collective effort of this beautiful gang. So, Split Fiction, what is it? Just as any previous Hazelight title, Split Fiction is a narrative split-screen co-op adventure game. And you play as two aspiring writers. We have Miyu to the left, writing sci-fi, and Zoe to the right, writing fantasy. They are unpublished, and they are invited to Raider Publishing for an exciting publishing deal where they need to enter machines that simulates their stories to life. And one thing leads to another, and they end up in the same simulation and are trapped inside the machine where they learn about Raiders' evil plan to extract all of their ideas. So our players are thrown into a duality and a struggle that plays out between two clashing main realms, sci-fi and fantasy. And we play through both protagonist stories as they try to find a way out of the simulation. And also, as with any previous Hazelight title, Split Fictions offers extremely varied environments and gameplay mechanics that are constantly changing throughout the whole experience. And from the get-go, when we in the audio team learned about this project, we quickly figured out some key challenges for us. And we knew that audio direction would be of critical importance because we didn't want to end up in a situation where either of the two main sci-fi or fantasy realms could be misinterpreted as the other. So they needed their own distinctly unique sonic identity. And this demanded a need for a clear and solid audio direction, as we had to decide on what we would allow either realm to be and not be. We also had to be mindful of scope and time management because the extremely varied gameplay mechanics and environments that Split Fiction holds as a result presented a massive scope for audio at an asset level. And this is where our first pass, only pass method comes into play, and we'll get back to it after having gone through our thought process behind the Split Fiction's audio direction. And I just also quickly want to mention that working with audio for a split screen game is pretty tricky, as the individual experience of each player's perspective needs to be rendered through one shared set of speakers, which in itself is a great technical challenge. But we have a solid foundation when we started working on Split Fiction from our previous game, It Takes Two, that we could build upon. And also, after having done this for a while now, we harbor a strong conviction that we have found a process at Hazelight that allows us to craft an audio experience that few other types of games can present. But this talk, however, will not go into details about our proprietary tech at all. I just wanted to mention this. But if you want to dive deeper into our technical solutions for split screen audio, ping me. My colleagues did a beautiful talk during this year's GDC and also a talk about the audio on It Takes Two. So reach out to me and I'll send links over to those talks. So onto our audio direction. With the multiple realm challenge of sci-fi and fantasy, we had big demands on our audio direction, helping us, or perhaps enabling us, to navigate the different sci-fi and fantasy realms with sound. If ever the question, where do we go now, would arise, we needed to have our compass. And our creative director, Joseph Fares, had said that he wanted the players to instantly know which realm they were in. And I have a quote from him from when he presented the project for our team. And he said that, imagine that I have printed out a bunch of pictures of sci-fi and fantasy, and then I show you a random picture at a time. And within the first second of seeing the picture that I hold up, you can tell me if it's either fantasy or sci-fi. And we in the audio team took that with us and set a goal for our soundscapes to have such a clear distinction from one another that the players could close their eyes and still know perfectly clear which realm they were in. So during early pre-prod of Split Fiction, the audio team collaboratively created an audio direction presentation in which we described these sound frames, Joseph's pictures, by specifying what identified each realm and what did not belong at all within that specific realm. And these are screenshots of some of the slides in our audio direction document showing you what I'm talking about. And this helped our audio team understand how each realm needed to sound, but perhaps more importantly, how it should not sound. And we agreed on what each realm was allowed to be, not be, and represent. and also agreed us on some distinguished methods, source materials, and processing that we wanted contained to one realm and not the other. And although what you see on screen here might look vague to you, the words and adjectives that we picked to describe these sound frames were very carefully selected and helped paint a pretty clear picture for us. And thanks to the words that we settled on, we laid out a foundation for us to work from and established some important guidelines that were very helpful during our production of sound for this game. And in order to give each realm their unique sonic identity, we tried to find contrasting words. So to name a few examples of what you see here, if fantasy should feel organic, we wanted sci-fi to feel engineered. If fantasy should feel slow and evolving, we wanted sci-fi to feel punchy and tight. And we didn't want fantasy to include any source of industrial machinery in its sound design, while sci-fi, on the contrary, in contrast, should have a source of mechanical origin and sound technically advanced. And I would like to continue this talk by showing you some video examples highlighting the difference between our definitions of sci-fi and fantasy. So this first video shows some in-game captures of ambiences. And you can try to keep in mind the frame descriptions that we had set in our audio direction. For example, sci-fi feeling engineered and technically advanced, whilst sci-fi in contrast should feel organic. That's here. And now let's look at some gameplay captures from both the sci-fi and fantasy realms. And examples from our audio direction that you can try to pay attention to here are sci-fi feeling cold and punchy, whilst fantasy in contrast should feel warm and slow.
Legend has it, it's the birthplace of the first primordial dragon mother, millennials ago.
Huh. Imagine how much she needed to eat every day. Right. If there was any doubt of where this prisoner might be, that's the spot.
No hesitations there.
Purple fall. Quite off, but pretty.
That's Ella's favorite color.
So, listening to these examples, I hope that you feel just as we do, that we managed to distinguish the two main fantasy and sci-fi realms clearly. And our aim was to have this distinction and contrast present for every type of sound in the game, from ambiences to player abilities to bosses, voice processing, and music. And as mentioned before, we wanted these realms to contrast each other and help navigate this thanks to the adjectives that we set for each realm in our audio direction, acting as our compass. So with that out of the way, let's move on to our compass's needle being the first pass, only pass method. And in its most basic form, it is what it sounds like being. The first rendered and implemented sound effects for a thing will be the final sound effects that we ship with the game. So tick the box, close the Jira, on to the next task. But simply designing sounds and implementing them at a very high pace is not very sustainable, and surely the output would not be as great as having more time to spend on each asset, right? So I would like to elaborate on this further and explain how we initially came to use this method within the audio team and what pros and cons that it comes with. And to be able to do this, I need to briefly explain how we work at Hazelight as a whole, and not just within the audio team. So Hazelight is a studio that focuses on gameplay first, and we want our players' experience to feel constantly fresh and introduce new game mechanics at a very high pace. Designers at Hazelight are given a lot of freedom, and as a result, production at Hazelight is not necessarily moving linearly. Work is being done scattered and bits and pieces completed here and there. We also have our own unit in Unreal Engine that we call Capability, which in brief is a single unit of functionality that contains all its own state and decision making, to quote our programmer Ylva. And the capabilities makes it very easy for our designers to make an abundance of gameplay and mechanics without risking components, modifying the same states. I won't go into more details about capabilities now, but if you want to know more about them, ping me about that too. And our programmer Ylva that I just quoted also had a talk specifically about capabilities at this year's GDC. So if you're interested to learn more about them, you can also check her talk out. But the reason why I mention capabilities is because they are important when it comes to our work with audio. So all of the above have implications for audio. We need to be very agile and do work on whatever is at hand for us. And there are next to no larger chunks of audio that we can design and implement systematically, since almost nothing is reused, and since capabilities, even if behaving similarly to other capabilities, are their own thing. And this amount of variation in terms of mechanics and environments as a result gives us little time for iteration and sound effects implementation, since the amount of content needing unique sound effects and unique implementation is very high. And I also want to look at the history of first pass, only pass, and therefore also the history of our audio team and that of capabilities. So capabilities were introduced during the production of It Takes Two as a need for designers to tackle issues that they encountered working on A Way Out, which was Hazelights' first game. And the audio team hadn't formed on It Takes Two until after the pre-production phase had ended. And the truth is that they spent 2 wild years creating sounds at a very intense pace, while at the same time creating the tech needed to realize their vision. And this was in the most ad hoc way imaginable. So one of the solutions for the audio team back then to ship It Takes Two became first pass, only pass, as a necessary evil and means to an end. There were no times for iteration, and they simply needed to move very fast. But why do we still use it if back then it was a necessary evil? Shouldn't we have become more prepared for foreseen and unforeseen challenges making audio for Hazelight games now? So let me return to my previous slide. All of this is still true building games at Hazelight. We have amazing proprietary audio tech at Hazelight thanks to our programmer Göran and our technical sound designer Joachim, which makes our work so much easier than before. But the fact still remains that the scope for audio is huge and the time for iteration is still sparse. And as at any other studio, things doesn't always move forward as intended, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this too. And as we were facing the end of production on Split Fiction, we were unfortunately in a situation where we needed to move forward in a very high pace. So we had to fall back to using first pass, only pass. And the way we have come to use first pass, only pass on Split Fiction is more sustainable now compared to how it was during It Takes Two, but it's still not ideal and it's still born from stress. However, it was our reality and we didn't see any other way than to adhere to it again. And on Split Fiction, this is what it boiled down to. So to be able to do sounds quickly and accurately, it has been of utmost important for us to have a solid and understandable audio direction to fall back to if hesitation arises. Again, it is our compass. So if we ever felt lost and asked ourselves, where do we go now? We could always just open up our audio direction presentation. But in the best of worlds, you knew the audio direction by heart, which also meant that you knew that the task in front of you would have a good placement in the mix and in the soundscape. So we just pointed our compass needle the way we needed to go and blasted on. Another big thing at Hazelight is that we don't, in the audio team, wait around for other departments to finalize their assets unless it's absolutely necessary. So in the case of final VFX or final art, we don't wait. We make our sounds sound good from the start. And what this means is that we don't do any temp sound effects. Everything that we submit to the game should be shippable, or at least not intended to be iterated on. And we've also learned that it's of great importance to, because of this, to finish what we start, and that we don't leave anything we started working on undone. So with development moving forward in the pace that it was, and can be for you too sometimes, I'm sure, leaving things undone would stagger our backlog and have tasks accumulating fast. And there's also the risk of forgetting about a task that's left unfinished until it's too late. And we don't want any temp sounds or half-completed features accidentally making their way into the shipping game. And then this point, quickness and accuracy. Although we have been under time pressure, stress, and have been forced to work very fast, we have also learned to trust our gut feeling, thanks to our knowledge of our map, the game, and our compass, the audio direction. And we learned that by knowing these two, we can make great sounds in a shorter time span than we could before. And this is due to many things, and I will shortly go into more depth on this now. So let's dive a bit deeper into quickness and accuracy. So from a sound design perspective, the first pass only pass method has taught us to be more mindful of what purpose a sound has before we start a task. So what's the purpose? Do we need spectacle here? Is this sound important for players? Does it need their attention? Where does it fit in the bigger picture of our soundscape? And when we start there, we enable us to make more deliberate choices in our sound design that better benefits the whole experience. Sometimes we end up in a situation where we are indeed working on a higher stake task that needs a lot more time and time for iteration. And other times we end up in a situation where we can allow ourselves to cut corners. And that's been extremely helpful for us as it saves up time for these higher stake tasks. So subjectively speaking, I would just take a sip of water. So subjectively speaking, when I'm working with something that I'm passionate about, as I'm sure you are too, I might sometimes get lost in the task that I have in front of me. For example, I might think that the footstep that I'm working on must be the best footstep sound effect ever. And I'm sitting around in Reaper, I'm browsing through libraries and recordings and finding this and that tiny detail that I want my footstep to have. I'm iterating and I'm spending lots of time to really make this one sound amazing. And yeah, it's a killer footstep, right? But then it's implemented and it's no longer the one thing that I hear. And it might even be something that we don't necessarily want our players' attention drawn to because it's part of something bigger. So maybe the time I spent adding all these details for this one sound was actually time not well spent. So don't forget your map. We need to populate the whole map with sounds, the whole game, and not just the spot that you're in right now. We also need to learn how to navigate our map. Just rushing through it might result in us missing things. So get a good overview and you might find shortcuts. Maybe a level or chapter can be super cool without sound effects. We had instances where we tried to work mainly with music to like cut down on the audio scope for a level. And asset refactoring has also been a key takeaway for me working on split fiction, especially when we were in the last stretch of the game and still had crazy amounts of sounds to make. We didn't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel every day because we already had maybe crazy good sounds that were accessible from our internal library. So let's say that I needed a cogwheel loop for a puzzle. I fetched it from a clock puzzle a few levels ago, and I EQ it a bit differently. Perhaps I time stretch it or pitch it, layer it with something else, and it's done. And when played back with everything else, it doesn't sound anything like the clock puzzle from a few levels ago. It's a new thing, even though it's really not. But the best part is that it took less time to make than to go fetch another cup of coffee. And yeah, that might be a bit exaggerated, but you get the picture. So now I want to show you some video examples of first pass, only pass. And this first example is from a level where we only had 1 week to design and implement all the sound effects. Although that's not counting regular work hours. We did do overtime on split fiction, and it feels very important to mention that. However, this level plays out in a village that's attacked by ogres, and our VO department had planned to make a recording session for the ogres with lots of variations, like Ogre 1, 2, and 3, but we didn't have the time for it. And also it didn't feel ideal to put the workload on our VO department since they were drained already, and the ogres, they wouldn't have any spoken words to localize anyways. So what I ended up doing was grabbing myself, our audio director, and our technical video designer, and I brought them into my room, played back a video capture I had of the whole level, and I had us perform takes of each ogres that we saw on screen doing efforts like jumping down rooftops, chasing the players and whatnot. And in this first video example, I will show you my Reaper session and we'll be listening to our audio director Filip Eriksson's performance with and without processing. And now let's look at the final version of this level that we shipped with the game.
Run! Definitely run! Oh, nights are corny! You like your desert snow with a masterpiece! In the story, incoming! You savages! Watch out! Brace yourself! Oh. What is wrong with these guys? That's awful! Oh, no!
So for us, this worked super well, and it took next to no time to design and implement, comparing to the route it might have taken with finding actors, writing a script full of grunts, recording the actors, going through takes, etc. So it's a good example of cutting corners, and as it saved up lots of time for the VO department. I have another first pass, only pass video example that I'd like to show. And this is from our first audio vertical slice that we did for Split Fiction back in 2021. And pay attention to the visuals and what I mentioned about leading with sound and not making temp sound effects. So we'll look at this video and then the final version of this level that we shipped the game with as well. So audio vertical slice.
You little brats think you're going to stop them, ye?
I don't think so. I know so. This is a Glock. It's over.
Over? Haha! You fool!
Comes this end. Not now, Zone. We We need to make sure he doesn't escape.
Never before have I met someone so stubborn and naive.
You know nothing about me.
Turn back now before it's too late.
Know this is epic.
Thanks, but stay focused.
Yuri, I have the data. This fucker is one click away from being the most used.
No, they said he will panic. Leave it be. I'll fix this once and for all.
Brace yourself.
So even though art, VFX, and even level design was not close to being final here, we focused on making everything sound as good as we could at the time. And we hoped that this would minimize the risk of us having to redo our sound design once the other departments would have been done. Also hoping that we would be able to use all the sounds that we put into this vertical slice once everything else reached the final state. So let's see how we did, looking at the final version of this level.
Stabilize! Okay. This is actually quite nice. Don't get too comfortable. Okay, we're here to stop a bomb train from reaching its target.
Is this like a train heist?
A sci-fi train heist.
Sure.
Whoa! Incoming mines! That's the train security defense. We need to blow it up.
Like a violent train conductor?
Yeah, more or less. The bomb is at the train's locomotive.
All right, let's get it. Do a barrel roll or something.
After it! The sides are blocked.
Close call.
There, catch that train!
So I'm sure, as you all saw, quite a few things changed in the level itself, but most of our audio from the vertical slice, such as ambience, pass-by sweeteners, the wingsuit sound effects, explosions, etc., were actually kept identical to the sounds that we did in the vertical slice. And sure, we had to make some adjustments in placements, and we did some refactoring of assets, but if we would have waited on working on this level until everything was in a final state from other departments, this would have been one of those things that were in the backlog of things left to make for this game. So I think this is a good example of first pass, only pass in terms of not waiting around for final VFX or art, and not doing temp sounds, leading with sounds. So work with what you have at hand, make it sound better than the game currently looks. And in the best of worlds, it will help you in the future as other things needs your attention. So we're now at the end of my talk, and it's time for my conclusion. And I would like to wrap this talk up by saying that the challenges that we faced during split fiction would not have been possible to overcome without a solid audio direction, and neither without our first pass only pass method. Especially considering the time constraints that we faced at the end of production. But I want to make an important point that first pass only pass is unsustainable and unwanted, and you don't want to be in a situation where it is a necessity, as it's born from stress and possibly even poor planning. But I want to share and perhaps repeat some key takeaways from our experience being in this situation, so that perhaps you can avoid that at your workplaces. So audio direction is key in enabling yourself and or the sound department to make deliberate decisions quickly. This makes your daily work much more effortless and enables you to trust in your gut. You know where to go because direction is in the name. And try to lead with sound when opportunity comes along or when it's necessary. Don't be in a habit of making temp sound effects or sit around waiting for final art or VFX if you're under time constraints. Make great sounds from the get-go, and if things change, you'll have this in your internal library to use as is or refactor how you want. They will be of use, but perhaps the temp sounds that you've made otherwise might not be of use. And think about the bigger picture and the whole game from A to Z. We need to deliver sounds for the whole experience. And also think about what the purpose of the sound you're working on is. Not getting stuck too long on less important sounds is crucial in enabling yourself to deliver on this. As my example from earlier, perhaps your footstep sound effects is not as important as something else. So scale down when you can and know that it will perfectly fit as everything else comes together. And try to learn how to cut corners with great results. You've seen my 2 video examples. Try to remember the sounds you have already made and think about asset refactoring. And perhaps you can also see an opportunity for bold design choices, scoping down on audio content in a certain situation. So make a compass with an attached needle. Don't do first pass only pass. Think about the takeaways I mentioned. They've been very helpful for us in our process of making first pass only pass more sustainable. The goal for us is to not have to use it, and we strongly believe that the takeaways that I just mentioned will lower our risk of being in a spot where first pass only pass becomes a necessity at all. And also remember your map and be mindful of your game from start to finish. Get to know it, get a clear overview as early as possible, and it might allow you to see shortcuts that you would otherwise have missed. Thank you so much for listening. I think we have time for some questions now. We're at 50 minutes, and I have an hour, so I'm gonna stop sharing and I will look at your questions. Let's see here. So we have a question from Ariel Merritt here. How did the idea of the first sound in the final sound work once testing happened? Were there ever times the one sound rule had to be broken because something just didn't sound right when it was tested, or was everything good to go from the first try? It's a good question. Of course, some sounds that we had put in early needed to be iterated on, but most of the sounds that made it into the game actually stayed. And I think this is, I don't know, I guess what I mentioned before about like quickness and accuracy, since we were under a very good understanding of our audio direction, we knew clearly where we wanted to go with the sounds task that we had in front of us. So the things that we did and put into the game in most cases worked perfectly. I hope that answers your question. We have a question from Greg Lester here too. Do you have an extensive pre-production to create sound palettes and prepare for the large workload? If so, how does that period usually look like? Yes, we actually did have this. So during pre-production, when most other departments were like testing out features or just testing things, we were working on our audio direction presentation, and we knew what the game was like intended to be, at least. So we started doing, I can't remember the name that we used for it, but like just buckets of stuff that we would hopefully be able to use whilst production ramped up for us. So for example, we tried doing like lots of various sci-fi like vehicle sounds and fantasy creature sounds early on in pre-prod that we could just like drag and drop into our Reaper sessions to fill out ambiences and things like that. I hope that answers your question, Greg. I'm wondering if I can have the chat and the question screen open at once. I'm looking through other questions here. Most popular. This has quite a few upvotes. So the ambient soundscapes in the natural fantasy world and the sci-fi future world feels very different in their volume and intensity. This brings up a few questions about the mixing approach. How did you transition between these realms so players didn't experience a sudden jarring volume spike? So to answer that first question, the way we transitioned in between levels was through cutscenes and the portals. And I think my video examples might be the fault of the difference in volume. So that might be only editing these videos. I know in the first example in the Ambience video, I stood very close to us, like a sci-fi vehicle highway. So I was very close to that source in the engine grabbing that video. So that's maybe why it was louder. And did you find that sound effects in the sci-fi scenes became less noticeable or lost their focus because of the louder ambience? So the way we mixed the game, I'm just going to read out the last question as well. Or did players often turn up volume during the quieter fantasy scenes? No, I don't think that players have turned up the volume during quieter fantasy scenes, because we still had, like we used Wise's HDR when mixing the game. I personally didn't mix it. It was our audio director doing that. But no, I don't think there were any issues with this. I think what your question comes from is my video editing skills. Sorry for that. Maybe it's a poor answer. I think this is an interesting one. Is the rest of Hazelight on first iteration get shipped mode or just the audio team? It is just the audio team doing this first pass, only pass thing. And it is because of what I mentioned in my talk with the workload being super intense, and that the production during Split Fiction didn't necessarily go as we had intended. So as we were facing the end of production of Split Fiction, we had barely finished like the main path of the game. And we have a bunch of like side portals that you can enter as well. And all of those side portals, like the pig world that you saw a snippet of, I don't know how many of you have played the game, but we basically only had like 1 week to design all the sounds for those side stories, but that is counting lots of overtime. So the first pass only pass method was only the audio team using that, and it was because of the like stress that we were under, which is my point with this talk. You don't want to be in this situation. So I hope that the takeaways that I mentioned during this talk will help you avoid that. Maybe I can do one more question. Another one from Ariel. I'm curious about how the work is divided amongst the sound designers. Did you have a certain category of sounds you always worked on? For instance, fighting or environmental sounds? Or were you assigned certain sections of each levels? So in the team, we are three sound designers. It's me, Gustav, our audio director, Filip, and we also have a fourth sound designer, actually, which is our technical sound designer. And the way we have like divided the work amongst us is that like we don't necessarily have ownership of categories of sounds. It's perhaps more like soft ownership, but it's not like one of us does all the bosses or one of us does all the ambiences, and that's also to do with we want all of us to be like generalists and be able to do all the various types of sounds for our games, but also as a result of the time pressure we were under during Split Fiction, especially at the end, we had to split ourselves up completely. So I was perhaps working on a whole level all by myself, doing the ambiences and the interactables and the creatures and whatnot for that level. And my colleagues were on separate levels doing the complete package there. So we don't have a certain category of sounds that we always work on. No, we do everything within our team. And I think that was everything I could do with the time that I have. Thank you so much for joining and listening in. And I hope that you thought it was a cool talk. It was very fun for me. Again, it was the first talk that I've ever had. So yeah, it was a fun experience. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.